Despite rapid growth and large developmental strides, much of the Asia Pacific still lags other regions when it comes to the adoption of information and communications technology and the policies that enable them. Now, digital infrastructure, regulations, innovations, skills, and more all require enormous investment. And the Asian Development Bank, in its Strategy 2030, devotes considerable attention to addressing those challenges and filling in the funding gaps and providing knowledge and technical support. Leading the ADB's Digital Technology for Development unit is Thomas Abel, whose role is to focus on driving digital innovation across the ADB's international development programs. Now, recently, I spoke to him about the Asia Pacific's tech landscape and the ADB's activities within it. Thomas, thanks a lot for talking to me today.
Thanks, Timo, for having me.
So let's talk a little bit about technology and digitalization in the Asian context. Now, digitalization and the need for a new approach to development is not a new concept, and a lot of governments are doing. But give me a sense, if you would, from your ADB experience of how important and how prominent is the digitalization and technology adoption agenda in the Asian countries?
So I would say it's becoming more and more urgent all the time. It's digitalization is a key part of our ADB Strategy 2030. And all of our member governments have a very high priority on this. They all have digital transformation agendas. Many of them have specific ministries set up focused on this. And I think just practically, in terms of the geopolitics, the situation with COVID, everyone is really rapidly looking at this as urgent, not just from development perspective, but from taxation to privacy to security to even the basic foundations of economic growth. And it's something, I think, when with the pandemic having put everything online and forced everybody to accelerate the transformation to the digital economy, it's in the last year has become even more important.
Having said that, presumably there is a range, a scale, if you like, of activity within the different countries according to their own economic and domestic circumstances.
Sure, yeah. Everybody is starting from a different point and actually has different objectives. Some countries still have very low internet connectivity and are struggling with basic, infrastructure. But all of them, I think, understand that technology can help them leapfrog. And at this point, technology is kind of like, at least access to connectivity is a basic requirement because, kids are unable to go to school and people are working from home. And it's just suddenly become very urgent. And we also look and say, hey, every country can start from where they are, and they're not trying to reach the same goal either. So I think we can actually tailor our programs to meet the needs of each of our DMCs.
So is connectivity the primary consideration when you're looking at implementing technology in a development context?
Well, I think it's a foundational one. Of course, electricity is another one. But there are the foundational technologies and infrastructure are there, and they're even more urgent. But I also think that you can't just look at that because there are things like, payment systems and national digital ID systems and security systems, e-government systems that are all needed in every government. And so if they only focus on connectivity, then obviously they're going to miss out. So I think this is part of the problem of development. People have a trouble understanding how much investment to make in each of these areas and what things are going to kind of happen naturally based on the market and what things require government intervention in order to happen effectively.
Is technology adoption within Asia just a matter of digital technology? Are there other technologies in the manufacturing space, for instance, for one case in point, where we should also be looking at technology as an enabler of better development?
Sure. I mean, digital, you could say everything fundamentally comes down to digital, but there are other technologies, of course, energy technologies. Are you going to use gas, oil, or coal? Or are you going to, go into other types of energy? And building roads are it's still important. But I think the point is that digital technology is an overlay on everything. So even a road, you have to design it using digital technologies so that it meets the requirements. That it can be built, it can be monitored, and you can track whether it's working and how much use it's getting. So digital becomes essential even on top of non-digital solutions and non-digital technologies.
I asked the question because in the context of one of the phrases you used earlier on, which was leapfrogging, I'm just wondering about how these things interact together. So leapfrogging, obviously, in a telecoms context, is a very understandable and very valuable process to a lot of countries, developing countries around Asia. But also, leapfrogging and high-level technologies in other contexts come with a price tag. They come with a long-term budget agenda rather than an immediate and quarterly or annually based financial frame that so many people tend to use. So I'm wondering, to what extent are other countries in Asia looking at leapfrogging and going, well, yes, I see the value of that in the long term, but actually legacy technology far better suits my short-term needs?
Yeah, I think that in technology, leapfrogging is kind of required. You can't just implement what's there today because it's moving so quickly. You have to look ahead at least somewhat, and you have to take some kind of risk. For example, now, we've gone from leapfrogging being, going from a fixed landline phone, analog phone or whatever, to a cell phone. Now it's basically to a smartphone. Smartphones are the device. And pretty soon there's going to be other things. The smartwatch actually is going to have other things like health sensors in it. Your temperature. It'll take your pulse. It'll measure your blood oxygen levels. This will be an essential device for health in the future. No government's ready for that today, but that would be an example of leapfrogging at some point. But today the leapfrogging is, build your government e-government platform so that it can be accessed via smartphone, because that's the device that the vast majority of people are going to be using as their first device. And if you're going to pick one thing, that's the thing to go to rather than a traditional web page or a kiosk or that sort of thing. And similarly, there are network technologies like there's a great example of Reliance Jio in India. They rolled out a mobile network that was based exclusively on 4G. There was no 2G, 3G, and old devices were just basically unable to use that network. That was a leapfrogging. The Indian government allowed them to do that, and as a result, they were able to have the lowest cost network available because it only provided 4G coverage, not all the other ones. And that
that was
yeah.
I'll come on to that in a second, but just let me keep it to a macro perspective for a moment longer. I just wanted to look at technology in the context of the sustainability conversation. The value of technology as an aid towards achieving SDGs and the imperatives of this new climate conversation. Do you see a connection there?
Absolutely. The main point is that digital technologies will allow us to do things more efficiently. So, people will be able to work remotely, for example, instead of having to travel back and forth to work. People will be able to access, education remotely. Digital technologies also enable the optimization of existing, infrastructure so that you can do it more effectively. And also, I think that you're going to end up moving to, a renewable energy model where renewable energy is providing electricity, and those systems have to be digitally enabled because the supply and demand it will need to be balanced more carefully than in traditional energy infrastructure.
And as we're talking about these, additional elements towards technology and the SDGs, how about impact as a consideration? Are you finding that these elements, these items are coming up in conversation very much around the region?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that the idea of moving to a digital workforce, for example. In the Philippines, you have 1.2 million workers who are basically working online, serving customers around the world through digital technology, and those jobs would just not be available without that technology, and it's also more sustainable because people don't have to travel. If it basically simplifies the model of employment, because you're basically using digital tools to interact with your clients, and you're not producing physical goods anymore. It's like you're moving from a factory worker and a farmer mentality to a digital knowledge worker. The knowledge worker doesn't have to have a workplace that's remote from their. They can work out of their home, or they can work in an office building near their home. That's much more efficient than having people work in a factory with the associated emissions and required infrastructure around that. And so I think the environmental impact is very clear as we're moving towards that digital economy.
Let's talk a little bit about specific cases then. You mentioned Reliance Jio. Tell me about the case study there, and what does it tell us, and how does it guide us?
Sure. So across Asia, we have still only about 50% of the population connected to the internet, which obviously we mentioned. It really limits what people can do. Well, India was lagging even more behind because they're a low-income country, and you had existing telcos, telecom operators in India who just were not offering services that could be affordable to the average person. So Reliance was an oil and oil and a retailer company, and they saw the change in the world, that we're moving away from fossil fuels towards digital technologies, and they created Reliance Jio, which is a new telco. They rolled out a network that is exclusively offering 4G services and nothing else. It's basically a data-only network. There's no voice plan, and they offered their service initially for 6 months for free. And today, their service is very inexpensive. The average person in India can afford this service because it's only data charges, and they have 400 million subscribers, and they have a higher data usage than in many developed countries, and they're expanding rapidly. And they're moving away from the idea that a telco has to make all their profits on voice calls and text and data, and instead saying these are lifetime customers, that we're going to have e-commerce, we're going to have data services, we're going to have video services. We're a general technology platform, not just a telco. And that was built on the idea that they started with a data-only network at a very low cost to deliver services.
Is there a lesson for other developing countries in that model, though? To what extent can that be a driver of adoption elsewhere?
Well, every country has their own regulatory environment and their own competitive environment, and sometimes it comes down to the competition. And ADB actually does work to enable new competitive models. In fact, we invest in telco operators in some of our developing member countries in order to help promote competition and drive down costs to get more people connected. And I think that lesson from Reliance can be learned. What technologies were they using, and what does it mean in a 5G world when you want to do this sort of network, and what can our other developing member governments learn from it. We're actually working on a case study exactly on this topic with the ITU that we're going to be publishing later this year.
There are many elements towards leapfrogging in this context, aren't there? And one of them being the interface between the private sector and the public sector. And those elements vary from country to country across the region. How does one approach the diffusion of technologies in the context of different administration and regulatory systems?
Well, we have a lot of work in regional cooperation and integration. And one of the ways we do that is we try to create regional harmonization on these regulatory standards so that the private sector can work more effectively across multiple countries, and information and products and work can flow across country boundaries and drive efficiencies And I think that's going to have to evolve as well because we have, in the digital world, there are, these global technology giants that really set the tone or set the product standard. And our countries, that we serve are struggling sometimes to manage that. How do they promote their own technology industry while also allowing the big giants to come in and operate in their country because they have so much technology to offer.
That question of diffusion is kind of interesting to me because, the idea of Tech for Impact to a certain extent is to try and make and pass on the knowledge of these kind of systems and these kind of initiatives so that others may also benefit from them and perhaps even implement them. Do you see knowledge sharing and the ability for other countries to be able to tap into the expertise of not only, companies like Reliance, but also the ADB and the experts that you have there? Is that a problematic area?
I think that governments are very forward thinking, that they want to they know they need to learn from each other and they need to collaborate, and that's one of the main things that ADB is good at because we actually are a trusted partner with countries across the region, and we are connected to all the major tech giants as members of ADB. And we do this, as across the bank. My team, for example, does workshops for the technology startup ecosystems in the region, and we bring together developing member government delegations to share their knowledge about how their own tech industry can be developed, and learning from established countries. We did one in last year in Korea, where we brought 15 governments together and actually learned how Korea had developed its own roadmap of technology and went from a undeveloped country to one of the leading technology innovators in the world.
So tell me a little bit about what the ADB's perspective is on the opportunities, I suppose. I don't want to put it in a commercial sense, but where the growth areas are in the Asian developing countries for technology adoption. Are there areas that you're focusing on specifically as being of the greatest value and impact and promise?
Yeah, I mean, growth areas, obviously, we talked about technology, about connectivity, and connectivity is very important, and we're even working in other areas there. For example, we're looking at Starlink as a satellite option for connectivity that will be a global network. Also, the the whole innovation space and how countries can promote technology innovation in their own, sort of homegrown technologies, from their education system to their vocational training system to their, their technology ecosystem, and how that all plays together. And then, we even look at with the finance sector. Finance is a core foundation of the digital economy. We need digital identification systems and payment networks, and there's a whole fintech revolution happening, and oftentimes the fintech revolution has to be a national program, because the fintech finance systems are regulated nationally and they don't cross borders as easily as other technologies. So that's an area I think that's very open. E-commerce, of course, services for remote work or digital work. These are all important areas that every country has an opportunity to develop in their own way.
Let's finish off with another case study. I mean, tell me a little bit more about a couple of the other projects that you're working on that you think have a regional resonance.
Sure. One project we're doing in Nauru is a project that's, Nauru is a remote island nation that has limited infrastructure. We're basically financing a new port facility so they can bring in more goods and services and export more goods and services. And during the pandemic, it's very hard to monitor that project. So we have enlisted new technology in a company that uses drones and high resolution imagery to basically create a digital model of the construction site every day, so that the government and ourselves can monitor that project on an ongoing basis without having to send people there and fly there and visually inspect it. And this is the
So
kind of
they scan it from above and then just monitor the changes in the
exactly.
scan image.
Yeah, they scan it 3D model of the project every day with high resolution imagery. So it really allows you to see the progress in a digital way without having to physically inspect, and it's just more efficient. And we've seen a lot of good uses of this examples. So this is the kind of like digital innovation for infrastructure. Another example is the Starlink case that we mentioned. Starlink is a SpaceX project where they're launching thousands of satellites that will provide high bandwidth connectivity services globally. They already have over 1,000 satellites in service, and this will bring connectivity to everywhere on the globe. And we can actually use that to supplement the existing fiber-based connectivity for remote areas where fiber is too expensive to reach. And this is something we're working with SpaceX and developing kind of a case study so we can help our member governments understand how to take advantage of that.
Well, solving that connectivity problem for the almost half of Asia that doesn't have it, it would certainly have a massive impact. Thomas, great talking to you. Thanks very much indeed for giving me the update.
Great. Thanks, Tamar.